Hi everyone, I'm Vanessa from Adelaide Beekeeping Supplies. Today I thought I'd talk with you about frames. By far the most common question that I get asked is which frame is the best, and more specifically people are referring to whether it has wax or plastic foundation. So what I thought I'd do is talk you through the three main different types of frames that are available and what might be right for your beekeeping situation. They're all viable and fit for purpose, but some frames go better with some types of beekeeping operations. But before we get started on the frames themselves, just a quick note on terminology. I'll grab one here. So this is a frame. So not a slide, not a rack, not a thing that goes in the box. I get people coming in, asking all of these things, but it's a frame. And in Australia, there are 5 main sizes that are used. So from smallest to largest, we've got half depth, ideal, manly, WSP, and full depth. And they are separate from shallow, medium, and deep, which are American terms for frames, and they're not interchangeable with Australian beekeeping. So if you stick with the right terminology, then if you're talking to another beekeeper about your setup and you're needing help or mentoring, or if you're talking to an equipment supplier and need to order something, if you use the right words, then you'll get the right product for your needs. So now to the frame types. So first up, we've got the traditional timber frame. You can buy flat pack or assembled versions of these. And so what we've got is your top bar, bottom bar, and your end bars. So differences in these, you might have ones that have got 3 or 4 holes, and some frames have a double groove. You can see a groove here and a groove there. Some of them, like this one, do both. So you could either wire it and wax it, or you can use it for plastic foundation. It's important to glue your frames before you fix them together. For the hobbyist, using an exterior PVA glue is sufficient. For more professional versions, using something called Type Bond 2 or Type Bond 3 is a more lasting product. It's a bit harder to get hold of, but it's also really good for building your boxes too. In terms of your fixing, you can either nail them or you can staple them. Our preference is to staple them, and to staple them from both the top and the sides. So if you have a look at this frame, so there's a narrow crown staple shot from the top, and then you can see that there's one, hopefully you can see that, from the side, and then for the bottom frame you can just go either side here. And the advantage of shooting from the side is that over time, so this is the pressure point, so this is where your J hook is going to be lifting the frames out of the box, and over time, if you've only shot from or put a nail in the top and bottom, these are the parts that after years they come apart, and it's really annoying when that happens when it's full of honey. So if you can, so either a compressor, so if you've got access to a compressor and something that shoots narrow crown staples, or what we've been using is a Ryobi Airstrike. So that is a battery operated nail gun. It shoots brads and narrow crown staples. So you won't break any world speed records, with the fastness of that operation. But it's really good for when you don't have the room or the otherwise need for a compressor. So the staples that we use from the side, we use 16mm to go through the side, and I think Dad Bert uses 20mm for the top, and if he goes through the bottom, but sometimes we just go side to side. So next up comes the wiring of your frame. So it's really important to wire your frame, because that ends up becoming the support for your comb once the bees have drawn it out. So you can either use a wiring jig, so you can build them with or without a jig. If you have lots and lots of frames to do, getting a wiring board is advisable, but you can do it by hand. With reference to eyelets, they're optional, and again, if you're using a wiring board, I would say eyelets are useful because that helps you thread the wire through, and then you can tighten it at each end before tying them off. If you're just doing it by hand, I would say that you can omit the eyelets, and then sometimes that helps because as you're using a pair of pliers to tighten the wire around each corner, it actually bites into the timber and holds, so it actually gives you a tighter finish without eyelets. But it's completely up to you. After you've done your wiring, I've just got some things off screen here. So here's an example of a 4-hole wired frame. So instead of using tacks, these people have actually been quite clever and tied them off. I don't know if you can see that. They've just tied it on itself, but more traditionally what people would do is put one tack here and one tack at the bottom, and then tie the wire around and then hammer in the tack at the finish of it. So the next stage is to actually embed a piece of beeswax foundation into the frame. So there's lots of different versions of this. So if you go onto YouTube and type in the search term embedding bee frames, you'll get lots of people showing how they do that. If you had your choice, you would use what's called an electric embedding tool, and that gives a really nice finish, and so that gives a nice straight finish. The wire is completely embedded into the wax, and so this means that it's firm. It is not coming out of that frame anytime soon, and it's going to act as a good support for the comb once the bees have drawn it out. There's a tool called a spur wheel embedder. I would not choose to use that. I don't like it. It kinks the foundation. It's a slow process, and I think you're just otherwise better off using an electric embedding tool, or using 2 terminals and a 12-volt battery in that fashion. While we're on the topic, I've got some notes down here that I'm referring to. Yes, variations on the timber frame. So if we go back to our wired frame, as this frame stands, if you were to put this in a hive, this is illegal. So there is a minimum requirement for a starter strip, and that's, I think, both in the Honeybee Biosecurity Code of Practice, but it's definitely in the SA Livestock regulations, which override the Biosecurity Code of Practice. So there has to be a starter strip of at least 2 centimetres hanging from the top in one continuous strip. The reason for this is it helps the bees at least have some direction in which to go in. If you were to put this frame in bare with a whole heap of other just wired frames, there is a really high chance that the bees will cross comb that, and then you will no longer be able to remove this frame for inspection of pests and diseases. So in putting a starter strip in, you would just get yourself a plastic straw and some melted beeswax, and then you would sit your starter strip. So you could actually embed this wire here. If you're not using wire, for people who are doing cut comb, you would probably omit the wire, and then you would actually just get your straw, dunk it in some molten beeswax, and you can stitch your way along so that the starter strip actually holds in place. If this is your first year of beekeeping, I would encourage you to stick to a full frame of foundation just to give yourself the best chance of success. While we're on the topic of beeswax, something that's not always known, but there are not a lot of regulations about beeswax coming into Australia. Honey is quite different, but beeswax, there's no real regulations on what can or can't come in. It's for those of you who are very new to beekeeping and don't know, Australia is the last country in the world that doesn't have varroa mite, and so our wax is free from miticide treatments. So that can't be said for any wax that comes in offshore, and there's nothing to stop that from happening, and there's no need for sellers to declare that their wax is miticide free. But any wax that comes from outside of Australia can and does contain miticide residues. So when you're purchasing either your foundation or your block wax, it's really important to ask the provenance of that. So we use only Australian beeswax foundation from Tobin's Wax, and then the block wax that you can purchase in the store, that is completely South Australian, and is reprocessed by me. So you know that the wax does not contain any residues. There's a couple of companies now, and I see it getting around on eBay, people selling waxed plastic foundation or waxed plastic frames. You do need to check to see, have they been waxed with Australian beeswax? So there's some questions to ask. That's just a little bit of an aside there. So onward from your white and wax frames, the next version is your plastic foundation. So you've still got a timber frame, but instead you are popping in a plastic foundation. So your plastic foundation comes in generally black. Sometimes you can find it in yellow for some sizes, but black is actually better because you, once the bees have drawn that comb out, when you're trying to inspect larvae, it's much easier to see the white larvae on a black background. I have people say to me that the bees prefer white or the bees prefer yellow. It's in the dark, right? The bees don't care. So I think we put a lot more importance about what colour it is. I'll get into this a bit more, but people are often against plastic because they say that the bees don't like it. This was certainly more true when plastics first came about. The plastic used needs to be high impact polystyrene, and it needs to be virgin, and it needs to be food grade. And sometimes I think when they first came up with the idea, some of the plastics weren't of the right type of resin and they smelled. So you should be able to pick that plastic up and smell it, and it had no smell at all. And the ones that we use now are good brands. We're switching over to Australian plastic foundation as well, and they have no smell, and once they're primed, they're accepted really well. But I'll talk more about when to present plastic frames in a little while. So sometimes as well, they come with the corners that can be cut off or not. I don't think it really matters. If you do, you can cut the corners off, go ahead. So what you're doing is just slotting it in either the top or bottom groove. I'll do it this way. And then pretty much what you're doing, and it's a bit hard to do this with the video, is you're just flexing it in. So you're just flexing it until it gets to the top, and that should sit snugly. There should be no bowing here. So it should just sit nice and flat on both sides. And there is your timber frame with plastic foundation. And then the last of our three types of frames is a fully plastic frame. So here's one here. So this, there's a couple of different brands around. So this one happens to be a Ceracell beetle resistant frame. So the difference that this frame has over others is that instead of just sometimes a slotted area where the dye has been, they've actually made hexagons here. And so what the bees end up doing is they end up filling that with wax, honey, and then capping it. You'll never extract that honey, but the either wax moth or beetles cannot hide in there. So this is a really robust frame. It has an almost identical footprint to a timber frame. So I highly recommend these, so you don't have to build them. So with both this one, with this one, you don't have to build anything, you just have to prime it with beeswax. And that's true for this as well. So you cannot present these frames unprimed to the bees. They will just ignore it, or they'll just draw some crazy comb and then ignore it. So for your best chance of success, priming it with beeswax is your best bet, and doing it well. So addressing the corners. So if you don't wax these corners, the bees aren't going to touch it either. Now this is where people get divided about wax and plastic foundation. So what I will say is that if you put a wax foundation and a plastic foundation in the same hive and ran a race to see which the bees would fill up first, they would probably fill this one up first. So it's the natural thing, and bees like the natural beeswax, so they will probably draw this out faster, and they do it more reliably for a greater part of the year. wax comb building is a energy intense exercise for the bees, so it takes a lot of nectar for them to turn to create wax, and they only like doing it at certain times of the year. So what I'd recommend to you, particularly if you're going for plastic frame or a timber with a plastic frame, is to get that comb drawn out in spring. So that's when the bees want to draw wax. There's abundant resources for them, and they do it with a minimum of fuss. If you try and present that plastic frame in autumn, they're just going to just mess around with it and not give you the results that you want. So I would encourage you to plan for the season. So if you're wanting to increase your hive numbers or add more boxes or have more spare boxes with drawn comb, get that comb drawn out in spring when the bees want to do it. You do need to check with whichever type of frame you're using. If you're starting from foundation, you need to check those frames regularly just to make sure that they haven't cross-combed, and if they have, just correct that by scratching it off with your hive tool. So my preference for people who are using electric extractors, wax foundation is very delicate, particularly when it's first drawn. If you try and put that in an electric extractor and spin it too fast, you'll end up having what's called blowout. And so the center of the frame actually blows out just through the centrifugal force. As the wax hardens in the hive, so the bees sort of firm that up over a period of time, and it'll turn from white wax, and you'll see it sort of over time go to brown, a darker color. So that comb is harder and is more resistant to blowing out. With wax foundation, you're always going to have to run your extractor at a slower speed than if you were to use a plastic frame. So that's why a lot of commercial beekeepers actually use plastic, because they've all got electric extractors and they can run them at quite fast speeds without anything blowing out and wrecking the frame. So if you think your beekeeping journey is going to take you into something where you might have 20 or more hives, you might consider switching over to plastic, at least for your honey super, so that when you're doing your extracting, and if you buy an electric extractor, those things kind of go together. Otherwise, if you're just going to extract by hand forever, then wax foundation is still a good option. There's just those limitations about what the wax can handle. In terms of other pros and cons, I think anybody who's been beekeeping for a while may have had this experience that you may have some stored comb that you thought went through the freezer and that you've put aside for the next season, and then you've come back to it and wax moth has gotten into it. So you've had this wax moth Armageddon, and what ends up happening if you've got timber with wax foundation and drawn comb, if you have a serious amount of wax moth that has gotten through that, the only way to deal with that is to burn that frame. So it's a complete loss. Whereas if you've got a fully plastic frame, you can actually scrape that down to the midrib and wax it again, and away they go. It doesn't have to be especially clean when you put it back in. The bees will clean that up. So if you have a wax moth issue, you can recover using one of these. And using the hybrid, so the timber with the plastic foundation, again, you will probably find that wax moth have made their little cocoon divots in there, and so the frame might look a bit how you're going, but again, you can scratch that foundation, the plastic foundation, back to the midrib and recover from that. So I think that's probably another pro and con of that. Overall for myself, I run almost exclusively plastic now. I do still have some of my white and wax frames left, but I'm removing that as I go, and that's just a preference. Doesn't mean one is better than the other. It works for me. I've covered most of what I want to talk about with the different frame styles. Before I go, just a quick note on different frame sizes. So different parts of Australia gravitate to different frame sizes for their honey supers. The brood box always has a full depth size, but the eastern seaboard tends to gravitate to WSPs. Queensland and South Australia have Manleys, and Tasmania tend to use Ideals. I stock mainly full depth and Manleys, and I do a little bit of Ideal, but I only do them in a plastic. because I think there's not much difference between the Manly and Ideal. And if I just hold them up to you to show you the difference, so there's really only about 1 centimetre in it. So in terms of weight difference, there's not much in it at all. So if you were deciding to go for a smaller honey box, go for a Manly, because you'll always have good availability of supply. So to finish up, I'd just like to thank everybody for watching and look forward to seeing you all at a meeting face to face sometime soon once the COVID restrictions ease. The Adelaide Beekeeping Supplies shopfront is currently on winter break. For those of you who know us, you know, we're a family business, and that we have a little rest in May, June, July when it's down season, just to recharge our batteries. The shopfront will be back on deck August 1st. So it's Saturday 9 till 1 and Wednesdays 10 till 4. With the current social distancing requirements, we're not going to be able to have as many people in the shop as we normally do. And if you know us, September, October gets pretty hectic. So I would encourage you to use the online shop, and if not, have it delivered to you. We've got really competitive courier rates, but use the click and collect function, and that way we can have everything ready for you, and then you're just popping in and out. So I think that might work really well for the season. We're still in winter, so it's the end of June coming up, so it was the winter solstice yesterday, so the shortest day of the year. If you haven't already prepared for your beekeeping season, I would encourage you to plan and start building your gear and painting it. So everybody catches the odd swarm, or your hive, you know, will accidentally swarm, and you need to be prepared with at least a lid base and a box, and some frames to go with it. And this is the perfect time to do it, when there's no other beekeeping activities required. So that's my hot tip. Thanks for watching.